Here is a painting of some hot Cheetos that I spent multiple sessions on, which is something I wanted to talk to you about, starting with mixing color in the palette. Let's take a look at the palette we're going to use. So as usual, I have the palette organized with the tube colors dark to light, warm colors down one side, cool colors down the other side. So I have burnt sienna, Mars orange, yellow ochre. I have more cadmiums than usual because the stuff I'm going to be painting has a lot of cadmiums in it. Cadmium red medium, cadmium red light, cadmium yellow deep, and cadmium yellow light. If you were going to boil these down to two, I would use the cadmium red medium and the cadmium yellow light, like the lightest you can find. Sometimes it's also called cadmium yellow lemon. On the cool side, I have ultramarine blue, cobalt blue, cerulean blue, and titanium white. So the first thing I'm going to mix up to get drawing going is just ultramarine blue plus burnt sienna, and then cobalt blue, Mars orange, just to have some colors without any white in it to map things out with. If you're not sure how to organize your palette, you can just imitate the way I organize mine, and I do. These colors complement each other really well across from each other. The ultramarine blue, burnt sienna make nice neutrals, and same with cobalt blue, Mars orange. A little bit lighter than that top one, but still without any white in it. The first thing I want to mix are some neutrals without any white in them. Ultramarine blue and burnt sienna will be my darkest dark, so I'll have one with more ultramarine, one with more burnt sienna, so they have a warm and cool. And then the same thing with cobalt blue and Mars orange. That way I have a darkest dark and second darkest dark with a little bit of temperature variation. So the first thing I want to do is map out all these hot Cheetos and save room for the darks. I got a lot of pretty dark darks in there, which is going to make this palette pretty handy. So again, the cobalt blue and Mars orange make up the second set of cool and warm darks, and ultramarine blue, burnt sienna make up this darkest set. I'm planning to spend some time on this. I thought it'd be a good idea to do a quick thumbnail sketch and have an idea how I want to put the bag of hot Cheetos onto the rectangle I have for the painting. A quick note about photography: because I have so much blue here, the video is skewing, the camera is skewing things a little bit towards yellow because it likes to compensate for all the blue it sees by adding a little bit of yellow. If I take something that has more yellow to it, you'll see everything else goes very blue behind it then. So I'll show you some shots of this as it goes along. The whole situation is a little bit bluer than it looks on video. Now I want to start with just the Mars orange cobalt blue mix, a little bit warm, not quite the darkest dark, to map out where all these Cheetos are going to go, which is going to take me a minute because there's a lot of Cheetos. So I'm just trying to figure everything out. Now here's how it looks after a first kind of block in session with a little bit of shadow in. Now I'm going to start mixing up some colors for the surround, which is how I like to refer to the things around the main object rather than background. Because color's active, right? It's an active relationship. So I get the colors surrounding the bag going early since the shadows are going to be so informed by those colors, right? Everything acts a little bit like a mirror and takes on the color that it faces into. So a lot of those shadows are going to be tinted by the color around them. Then I realized that lime I better get going on. So I moved where I had it originally and just wanted to try and paint the lime to finish. So like with everything else, I'm working dark to light. I have the shadow set in and working my way from the darkest dark up through to the highlight on the lime because I know it's going to change more than the Cheetos will. Now that I have the lime looking okay, I'm going back through and starting with the darkest dark inside the bag and working my way through all the colors in general. Again, I'm testing colors with little dots to see how they look on there and adjust them accordingly. These Cheetos are sort of a tricky color to paint, so I just want to take a first go at all the big areas of color in the painting. And then when I'm done painting for the first day, I'm going to cover the palette with saran wrap to keep the paints that I mixed in little piles wet till the next time I work on it. So I just clean up the palette a little bit, tuck some saran wrap around everything, and then I'll come back to this painting later. So now I'm going to start back into this painting, and one of the things that's happened is some of this paint has gone a little bit matte, which can happen as layers dry down. I'm gonna oil it out, which is essentially just breaking the surface tension of the medium I have, which is solvent, walnut oil, and alkyd, or you could just use an oil like walnut oil, linseed oil, or poppy seed oil, and you just brush it over. See how it's bringing those darks back to how they were. You want to be careful with this because you want to make sure that your painting is dry enough to oil it out without things smearing around. In this case, the painting's dry enough, but if it wasn't, I could smear it, which I wouldn't want to do. If the painting is a little drier than that even, I could take a little piece of shop towel and make sure that to rub in the oil so that it coats the surface evenly and lightly. And it's a good idea because as I'm matching these paint colors, especially in the dark range, I'm going to want to match the values, and if the paint has dried down matte, those values can lighten up. See how it's pulling back the darks a little bit? It can also make it easier to get soft edges. So I'm just going over this very lightly so that I have a glossy surface. Since the oil paint goes down gloss, if I'm matching colors, I would not want to match a matte color with glossy paint because then I might have odd, hard edges. Another strategy for going back into this, I'm going to basically work dark to light, back to front. That gives me a very clear way of entering back into the painting and figuring out what to do first. So the darkest darks I have are in here, so I'm going to start there and work my way back through. So now I'm going back in with those, working out of the warm variation of that ultramarine burnt sienna for the Cheetos since they're warm. And as I have the colors mixed there, I tend to mix a palette color, put a dot on there and test it, see if it needs to be warmer, cooler, lighter, darker, yellower, redder, and just continue to work my way up through from the shadows. And that way I can get the edges soft in the shadows, because darkness is desaturation and also softer edges. It's not just making things darker. There's other things that happen. So I'm just trying to work my way up through the Cheetos and trying to get at some of the texture on the Cheetos, which is tricky. They're kind of dusty and they have some bright spots on them, but a little bit soft edges. I'm also going back into the cast shadows because I see where some of them could be darker, some of the edges could be a little bit better articulated, where they go from hard to soft. So working my way through the whole painting, dark to light. You'll notice the lime is not there. I actually put it in the refrigerator because I wanted to preserve it, and I like that cut that I had, so I'll pull it back out in a second and work on it. I'm really just trying to work my way up to the highlight on all these Cheetos. Now I'll put the lime back there, see if I can make another pass through, make distinctions, especially in darkest darks and cast shadows, then continue to work my way back up through into the Cheetos. One thing that's definitely changed is you'll notice there is a little ring of oil around the bottom of the Cheetos, which I am going to choose to ignore and just paint the Cheetos as though they were on the lighter surface when I put them there at first. So a lot of this is now I'm starting to get down to smaller brushes, working edges and details. Delacroix said to start with a broom and finish with a needle. You notice when I started these Cheetos in, I blocked in the big mass areas of color. Then I'm working my way up through and kind of rounding them out from dark to light and getting up into the highlights, working back through, watching where edges touch, looking at how when edges touch, is there a clear difference between things, to sort of troubleshoot my way through the painting, working my way back through the surround because I saw where I thought it could be a little more clearly articulated. So as I work my way back through the surround, in between takes I'm also looking at the painting and the Cheetos backwards in a mirror. It was a good thing to do to check for accuracy because it reverses both things, so it's like someone else painted it. Working my way through the shadows of the lettering and the bag, which you can see those neutrals that I mixed up at first are really useful for warm and cool shadows to tint out these dark oranges. And they do take on a little bit of blue as they face down into the blue surround. You can see the palette stays organized, cool on the left, warm on the right, and top to bottom it's dark to light. So I'm gonna go ahead and cover it again with plastic for one more session later. I'm gonna go back into this one more time. I can feel this is dry to the touch where I oiled out the thin darks. These have cadmiums in them, which are going to dry slower, so I'm going to probably oil out the darker part and watch it as I get into the lighter part because I don't want to smear around the cadmiums. Everything else feels kind of dry to the touch. I wanted to hold on this view for a minute because it's how the Cheetos look from the angle that I'm painting them from, which shifts the drawing a little bit just to give you a better idea of what's going on. The lime's at a slightly different angle because I'm over a hair more. And also you can see the palette as it opens up. You see the tube colors of the blues, dark to light on the left. Tube colors, earth tones down into cadmiums on the right, dark to light, and all the mixed colors in the middle. The blues for the surround, and then the Cheetos and bag on the right. So as I continue to go through this, I'm modifying those colors, but keeping the palette organized really helps me be clear about when I'm going back into the painting, how to make subtle differences between things. Because at this point, I'm refining things that are fairly clear. I just want it to be, I want to really get the light as clear as I can in this. So I'm really working through starting to put in some brighter highlights now and calibrating these where the orange of the bag faces up, where it starts to cool a little bit as the bag faces into the blue around it. Since the bag's very shiny and has lettering on it, there's a lot of subtle color variations. So you notice in my hand there too, I have that little dowel, that square dowel I use as a mahl stick. Malen is German for painting. It's just a stick to steady my hand when I'm going into some of the details. At this point, I'm working with a pretty small brush. Also, I'm trying to drag the paint on a little bit drier and kind of get at the surface texture that the Cheetos have with the paint quality, right? Use the viscosity to try to get across how the Cheetos sort of feel when you look at them by considering viscosity. So for example, in the bag, which is shinier and slippier, maybe I use paint with more medium in it, longer brush strokes, and in the Cheetos, sort of shorter, drier brush strokes so that the paint itself, the paint quality sort of is not just the color and value I want to be accurate most of all, but the viscosity is also something to think about when you have multiple sittings and can control that more. So Corot had a hierarchy for painting of form, tone, and color in that order, which is how I built this and how I tend to paint in general. It's a great clear way of parsing out the complicated problem of articulating stuff with this colored grease. And you can see the palette opened up a lot more there. The colors getting more complicated. He put surface last after that. So really that's kind of, now that I have the color and value mostly sorted out, I'll start to tend a little bit more to the surface textures. Here's a closer look at those Cheetos. So you can see what I was doing with that small brush all that time, and also see all the color differentiations I was trying to make with the warms and cools depending on what the Cheetos were facing into in the bag. And then we can pan back so you can see shot of the painting finished alongside the subject of the Cheetos and the palette as well. So I actually found this fun. I like to paint this kind of thing a lot, and I hope that it was useful and informative for you as well.